Nothing I didn't expect, and they're a good defensive team, and Lacan's going to try to wear you out. Obviously, this organization has great history and great tradition.
The Indiana Fever's recent win over Connecticut should have been a straightforward story about a young team grinding through adversity. Instead, the game's aftermath became something else entirely, a collision between genuine team chemistry and the media ecosystem that surrounds it. To understand what actually happened, it helps to start with the game itself. The Fever came into Connecticut carrying real momentum. Sophie was returning to the arena where she had sustained a serious knee injury the previous season, the kind of return that carries psychological weight regardless of what anyone says publicly. Connecticut, for its part, was not going to make it easy. Their guards applied full-court pressure across all 94 feet from early in the game, a deliberate strategy to create fatigue, force turnovers, and disrupt Indiana's offensive rhythm before plays could even develop. The Fever built an 11-point lead despite that pressure, which reflects genuine effort. But the margin was fragile given the conditions, and Connecticut's defensive approach was exactly the kind of sustained physical challenge that exposes teams with thin rotation depth or limited coaching flexibility. Viewers who watched closely noticed the grind. The complaint wasn't that the Fever were losing, they won. It was that the path to the win felt unnecessarily difficult, and that raises questions about how the team is being prepared and deployed. A 10-point final margin is a convincing result. It does not, on its own, answer questions about whether the roster's talent is being used well. Winning despite suboptimal in-game management is a real pattern in professional sports, and Indiana's fan base is watching carefully enough to recognize it. The officiating drew its own frustration. Multiple calls throughout the game struck observers as inconsistent, with physical play on the perimeter drawing particular criticism. The technical foul issued for a delay of game violation was minor, and the player herself acknowledged it with some humor. The broader officiating picture was less easy to laugh off. What followed the final buzzer, though, redirected attention entirely. During the post-game press conference, a reporter set aside any discussion of the game's tactical dimensions and instead introduced a specific allegation that internal reports were circulating about a fractured locker room and that the team's stars were in open conflict. The implication carried particular weight because it was framed not as speculation but as documented information actively circulating within league and media circles. The claim was that despite a 3-game winning streak, the chemistry within the Fever roster had broken down fundamentally. The response from the players was immediate and direct. Rather than offering carefully managed statements, the players addressed the premise head-on. The argument they made was simple. A team that is internally divided does not win 3 consecutive games in a professional league. Results require coordination, trust, and shared execution in real time. You cannot manufacture that under the scrutiny of professional competition when the whole premise of your existence is contested. Their frustration was not performative. It was the visible reaction of people who had just won a basketball game and were being told, in real time on live television, that their relationships with each other were fraudulent. One player pressed further into the structural argument. If the evidence for a locker room rift consists of social media posts, anonymous speculation, and selective clip interpretation, then the reporting itself is the problem. The claim being advanced was that sports journalism in its current form had become too dependent on the pace and effect of social media, that accounts with no access, no sources, and no accountability were setting the terms of the story. That argument is worth taking seriously independent of the Indiana Fever specifically, but it lands differently when it's being made in real time by the people being written about. The larger media ecosystem around women's basketball has expanded rapidly, and with that expansion has come a particular kind of high-volume, low-verification commentary that operates faster than any editorial process can manage. Some of that commentary has been supportive and analytically serious. Some of it has been reactive and fabricated. The player's argument is that the distinction is not being maintained carefully enough, and that legitimate outlets are too willing to treat social media consensus as a source. On the basketball side, the concerns viewers raised deserve separate treatment. The officiating criticism following the Connecticut game was consistent with a broader pattern of frustration across the fan base. The complaint about fouls, specifically the characterization of calls as too aggressive, with physicality either going uncalled or being penalized inconsistently, tracks with what competitive women's basketball has dealt with as it has grown in visibility. Higher-profile games create higher-profile officiating controversies, and the Fever's position as a nationally watched team means those controversies draw more scrutiny. The strategic question is more pointed. Viewer feedback after this game and across multiple games this season has returned consistently to the same concern. The team's offensive firepower is not being structured in ways that reflect what the roster can actually do. Caitlin Clark is a player with specific abilities, off-screen movement, shooting range, passing angles, that require a system designed to exploit them, not simply accommodate them. The surrounding pieces are capable of complementary roles. Lexi Hull's defensive contributions have been reliable and consistent. The secondary scorers can function in space. The question being posed from the outside is whether the coaching staff is building around what this roster is, or managing it in more conventional terms that leave performance on the table. Stephanie White has operated under significant pressure since taking the job, and the results this season reflect a team that is improving. A 3-game winning streak is real. The team's ability to close out a competitive road game in Connecticut, with a player making an emotionally charged return to a difficult venue, demonstrates something about the squad's composure. But composure and optimal deployment are different things, and the fan base has been consistent enough in identifying the gap that it can't simply be dismissed as unrealistic expectation. The relationship between what a team's talent ceiling looks like and what its coaching is building toward is always contested in real time. It is clearest in retrospect. What can be observed now is that this roster has demonstrated it can win games at a professional level, and that viewers who follow the team closely believe it should be winning more decisively and more consistently. Whether that belief is correct depends on factors: injury, schedule, league parity, that are not fully visible from the outside. What the post-game press conference demonstrated above everything else is that the Indiana Fever are not a team moving quietly through a season. The attention on this roster, driven significantly by Clark's presence, means that every game generates a volume of interpretation that no other WNBA franchise currently deals with at this scale. That attention has value. It has driven league-wide visibility and investment. It also creates conditions where a minor moment on a sideline becomes a week-long narrative, and where a genuine team chemistry question and a fabricated locker room rumor can occupy the same media space with roughly equal volume. The players' refusal to let the press conference frame stand, their insistence on returning to the game itself as the relevant evidence, was not just a defense of their relationships, it was a statement about what they want to be evaluated on. The game, the results, the work. That is a reasonable request. It is also one that requires the surrounding coverage, every clip, every post, every aggregated reaction, to operate with more discipline than it currently does. That discipline is not guaranteed. In the meantime, the Fever will play another game, and the cycle will begin again. The officiating will draw complaints. The rotation decisions will raise questions. The wins and losses will accumulate. And the story of whether this team is being coached to its potential will continue to develop in real time, in full view, with no shortage of people ready to weigh in. Some of them with access to what's actually happening, and some of them without. The distinction, increasingly, is the entire argument. The days following the Connecticut win offered no real cooldown period. The press conference clip circulated widely, generating its own secondary wave of commentary that, in a familiar pattern, diverged almost immediately from what was actually said. Some coverage focused on the players' frustration with media fabrication. A larger share focused on the fact that the frustration existed at all, treating the denial as confirmation that something worth denying had happened. That inversion, where pushing back on a rumor is treated as evidence of the rumor, is one of the more durable features of modern sports media, and it is particularly aggressive in spaces where women athletes are involved. The Fever did not have the luxury of stepping away from it. The schedule continued, and with it came the next set of variables: matchup preparation, rotation decisions, health management across a roster that has dealt with availability questions throughout the season. Each game adds to the record, and the record is what ultimately answers the questions that commentary can only pose. What the Connecticut game added to that record was specific. The Fever demonstrated they can protect a lead on the road under sustained defensive pressure. They demonstrated composure in a high-stakes environment with genuine emotional weight attached to it. And they demonstrated, in the closing minutes, the kind of coordinated offensive execution that requires trust between players. The ball movement that produced the decisive score was not the product of a fractured team running isolation plays out of desperation. It was structured, deliberate, and effective. That does not resolve the coaching question. Winning a game with good execution in the final minutes is compatible with leaving points on the board throughout the first 3 quarters. The broader pattern viewers have identified that the offensive system does not consistently place Clark and the surrounding personnel in positions that maximize their collective output, does not require the team to be losing in order to be valid. Teams can win and still be operating below their ceiling. Identifying that gap is not pessimism, it is analysis, The officiating question similarly does not disappear with a win. Physical play on the perimeter that goes uncalled in one direction and gets penalized in the other creates an uneven competitive environment regardless of the final score. When that pattern appears consistently across multiple games, it stops being a single-game complaint and becomes a structural observation about how the Fever's style of play is being officiated. Viewers noticed the frustration in the comment sections after the Connecticut game was not about losing, it was about the conditions under which the win was secured, and whether those conditions reflect a consistent standard being applied fairly. These are the questions that will follow Indiana through the remainder of the season. The roster is talented enough that the wins will continue to come. The margin for error created by that talent also means the deeper questions about system, about deployment, about officiating environment can be deferred without immediate consequence. At some point in the postseason, that margin narrows. When it does, the answers will matter considerably more than they do now.